Rob Black and Lily Irvin Vitella, thank you so much for being with us today. Lily, New Mexico First is recruiting folks for a redistricting task force. What is the point of this task force? What is it going to do?
We're bringing together 21 to 25 people from across New Mexico to pull together recommendations and suggested rules for our state legislators in the redistricting process. So there's been efforts before to have community engagement and community conversations, but the connection between what community is saying and the redistricting results aren't always so clear. And so we believe that with greater rules of engagement, a shared sense of accountability from a cross-partisan group, that we'll be better able to understand and reflect the voices of communities in the redistricting process.
I think I caught just a little bit of an understatement there. you you just wrote a policy brief that is soon to be published about redistricting. Tell me just the overview of what you found.
So basically what we did is we write policy briefs in a way that are intended to be rigorous yet super accessible to folks. So for folks who haven't had an opportunity to think much about redistricting and how that works, there's a bit of history, connecting it kind of to our history in New Mexico and in the country around efforts to have open, democratic, inclusive elections. So that context setting. And then really what we dive into are things that work in terms of civic engagement and genuine, deeply authentic civic engagement rather than the appearance of. So we don't have a particular strategy in mind that we'd like the task force to adhere to. We really very much have faith and belief and confidence of a lot of really smart people to bring those ideas forward, and for good ideas well facilitated to bubble to the top as recommendations. But where we do have a real commitment in terms of outcome is around process. And ultimately, this task force is responsible for giving a roadmap to legislators to consider for citizens to be able to decide who our voters or who our elected people are, rather than our electeds deciding who their voters are. So we want more open, more competitive campaigns.
Rob, you're on the board at New Mexico First. You're helping to organize this process. Uh, it has been brutal the pandemic has been brutal for families, for individuals, for businesses, especially. Why do you think members of the business community should pay attention to redistricting now?
Gwyneth, that's a great question. And I think it's something where understanding the consequences of bad redistricting are really important. And those consequences, there's many consequences to it. From the business community perspective, we want good, thoughtful governance. That means when you have competitive districts where people have to debate their ideas, and those ideas are, and the race can go either way because it's really going to be based on those competitive ideas, that creates better governance. It creates better government. When you have the ability for an elected official to pick their own voters, and they create safe districts, so a district where it's overwhelmingly Republican or overwhelmingly Democrat, the discussion tends to get extreme on either side. And so they don't have to cross over for other party votes. They're really going to go try to just grab their own parties, which causes really extreme positions to be surfaced in those discussions and those elections, and tend to be more extreme candidates that get elected. We would like to see again that the requirement or a situation where those races are competitive, the ideas are competitive, so that the governance is more effective in the end.
So, business people are just one of among a large group of people that you think should be involved. Lily, who are you looking for to serve on this task force? Should people have some experience? Should they be experts?
So we're looking actually for a whole range of perspectives. Ultimately, we want our task force to look like New Mexico. We want it to look like New Mexico in terms of race, ethnicity, culture, coming from different language traditions, coming from different political ideologies, coming from different faith traditions, or not a faith tradition, or not a political party, right? We have folks who have tossed their hat in the ring, who are PhDs or JDs, so they're they have some expertise on these issues in terms of the technicalities, but we also really value and respect the expertise of people in community, and everybody in a democracy has a stake in this. And so while we are impressed and inspired by people's sweat equity that has gone into it, we know that there are a lot of ways to bring that to bring value to the conversation. So what you'll see if we are successful in our efforts, and I have every reason to believe that we will be, is very well balanced in terms of political ideology, very well balanced in terms of geography, and very well balanced in terms of demographics, including a range of kinds of education expertise, both from lived experiences and also from that being somebody's research priority.
And so, Rob, you're representing the business industry, one of the hats you wear, but you also have some experience with redistricting and democracy promotion in your past.
I do. I've had the privilege of working overseas, doing democracy development work in South Africa during the transition, and in Cambodia and other countries. But more recently was involved when I was at the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce in efforts at statewide reform in California, and where we were looking at how did we do redistricting in California? How could we improve it in a way that really created more of a community voice, that made the discussions of how we structured those districts more fair and transparent, and move those away from really partisan discussions and into nonpartisan or really nonpartisan discussions, because they were looking at, we looked at using retired judges, civilians who aren't affiliated with elected officials, to really help create communities of interest so that you're not splitting up underserved communities who have historically been damaged in these fights, in these gerrymandered districts, because their power is diluted. And when that happens, you lose a voice in the community that's really, really important.
In New Mexico, the legislature does pretty much this whole thing. They get the census results, and then they essentially go behind a curtain and come out a little while later with a plan. It's a little more complicated than that, but not much. And California ended up deciding to do it in a really different way. What did they decide?
They decided to, again, go to a nonpartisan approach where I believe it's a panel of retired judges and maybe even existing judges. I can't remember. It's been a decade since we went through this reform there, to help set the criteria for how they would first draw the lines and then put forward maps for review and approval. So it was really, again, done in a nonpartisan way. What it was designed to keep communities with a set of criteria to base those decisions on, but it was designed to keep communities of interest aligned, to ensure that those districts were balanced as much as possible as far as the representation, so that you did have good discussions. It wasn't the idea of whose party you were with wasn't part of the criteria to determine where the lines were drawn. And they also didn't restrict it to, well, the current representative lives here, so we need to make sure they get to stay there. Because that's not in the best interest of the district. That's in the best interest of that elected official, but that's not what democracy is about. Elected officials are there to serve the people. So we need to make sure that the people have a fair representation within their district when they're electing their leaders.
And that's an interesting little tidbit you just brought up, because, in New Mexico, as it is now, they are allowed to consider where the existing lawmaker lives as a factor in drawing the district. So, Lily, is this the kind of thing that might come out of the redistricting task force, a recommendation to, for example, change that?
It might. I think one of the things that we're being guided by is the best practices across the country, right? So, but we also always want something to make sense for New Mexico. So the NCSL has done a really good job of laying out, here are some best practices, here are some emerging practices, and explicitly this issue around how to deal with incumbency has come up. And the suggestion nationally, the trend nationally, is away from protecting incumbents for exactly the reasons that Rob suggested. So that question will certainly be raised. Will there be a recommendation or a rule around what to do about incumbents? Will we suggest that it's okay to protect incumbents, or will we suggest that it's more important that we take other factors into consideration and are either neutral to that, or we're actively putting that aside and saying we don't want to protect incumbents? And that has a lot to do with Rob's point, which I think is a sound one, is what's going to lead to the fairest, most open, most competitive elections, so that way people who are running for office have a vested interest in making sure that they're building relationships with all of their constituents rather than just the folks who are most likely to vote for them.
The National Conference of State Legislatures, which is sort of a research body that study these things, you just referenced them, Lily, and they did a report specifically looking at New Mexico. We talked about it last year, comparing New Mexico to other states and how we do the redistricting process. One of the things that it showed was that there are comparatively fewer rules about the way we have to do it here. I thought their report was very clear. I wrote a 25-page report on redistricting myself last year. And I'm just the last one in a long line of people who've done reporting on the pretty dysfunctional, I don't think I'm stretching it to say pretty dysfunctional way that we do this here. What makes you think that this task force is going to accomplish something that no one else has accomplished before?
I'm eternally optimistic, so I'll just take what I say with a grain, but I am somebody who very much believes that democracy works, especially when it's done well. And so the fact that we are bringing together people of a lot of different diverse perspectives and that our eye is on the prize, I think that's critical. I think another piece is we're at a very interesting juncture in time. I think there are issues that the pandemic has kind of ripped the veil back on, and that Black Lives Matter has amplified and brought to the forefront about what happens when we don't have the freest, fairest, most inclusive, most competitive of elections. What happens when the legacy of racism in our voting laws and in our Constitution continues to play out and some people's vote matters more than others? Well, what happens is that we have ways that resources are distributed, that decisions are made that don't serve the public interest, that are more likely to serve the special interest. And so I think at this point in history, more than any time, at least in the last 4 decades, there's a real attention to how government functions, how power is wielded. And so I'm a firm believer that there are people who have been marginalized, who are still willing to give some credence to us having a healthy democracy and a social contract in place. But then it is upon all of us to get it right, to really design systems of decision-making about the distribution of power and resources in ways that really serve community good. And if we fail to do that, not only will it be really expensive, as it was last time around, where we spent over $6 million in lawsuits and then ultimately had a judge draw the map, but we will lose so much in our social capital, in our belief and confidence in one another that we can do this thing we call democracy right. And I think that I'm not the only one who sees just how much is on the line. And we know that even if our legislators choose to take none of the recommendations of this task force, that people are watching in a way that they're no longer deferring and saying, okay, well, we'll let other folks figure that out. Like, people are watching and they care, and they know that redistricting isn't this thing that's so complicated and so over folks' head. It's something that impacts all of us. And I don't think that we can do a process again where we disregard what the community says without there being a price to pay at the polls.
Thank you for that. Rob, we only have a few seconds left here, but I wanted to ask you, you've seen how this played out in other places. The California system is very different from the way it happens here in New Mexico now. Will you consider this process a success if there is incremental, tiny change that comes out of it?
Well, I think any improvement is improvement, but I would say that it is fundamentally unfair given the time we are in, and I think it's always been unfair. But it's, as Lily said, it's elevated for the powerful to get to pick who gets to continue to be powerful. There's an inherent conflict of interest there, and what we need to do is set up an opportunity where the citizenry has that power and gets to help decide how those discussions, how those debates are structured. And I am also optimistic that folks who, with good hearts and good intentions, will realize that it is in their best interest to create that power in the people and not be seen as hoarding that power to themselves.
Rob Black and Lily Irvin Vitella, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having us.